My family wrote me off for 8 years. They packed my belongings into garbage bags, changed the locks in the middle of November, and told me I had exactly 1 hour to get off the property before my father called the police. 8 years later, my brother walked through the front doors of my design studio, sat down in my best client chair, and told me I owed him 40% of my company. He brought my father with him, and my mother, and my sister-in-law, who spent the first 3 minutes of their visit critiquing the artwork I had commissioned for the lobby walls. I want you to hear how I handled it. My name is not important. What is important is that I am 31 years old. I am the founder of a boutique interior architecture firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I have spent the last 8 years building something that nobody in my family believed I was capable of. I specialize in high-end commercial renovation, hotels, corporate headquarters, medical suites, private clubs. My firm has completed 47 projects in the last 4 years alone. We have been featured twice in Architectural Digest. My waiting list is currently 7 months long. I am telling you this not to brag. I am telling you this so you understand exactly what walked through my door that Tuesday afternoon in October. The studio was humming with the controlled energy of a deadline week. My lead designer, Priya, was pinned to her drafting table under 3 monitor screens. 2 junior associates were arguing quietly about a finish sample for a hotel lobby in Raleigh. The air smelled like fresh espresso and wood chip samples. I had just come off a call with a developer in Atlanta who wanted to discuss a 40-room boutique hotel project, and I was feeling the particular kind of satisfaction that comes only from building something entirely with your own hands. Then my receptionist, a composed young woman named Dani, appeared in my office doorway with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was the careful, practiced blankness of someone trying very hard not to show alarm. "There are some people in the lobby asking for you," she said quietly. "They say they are your family." I set down my pen. I took one slow breath. I told Dani to give me a moment and asked her to offer them water. Then I walked to the narrow window that looks out over the reception area, and I looked down. My father was standing in the center of my lobby, with his arms crossed over his chest, wearing his good charcoal suit. My mother sat in one of the leather reception chairs, with her designer handbag pressed against her lap like a life raft. My brother was pacing near the entrance with his phone out, glancing at the custom millwork paneling on the walls with an expression I recognized immediately. It was the same expression he used to wear at Christmas when he was calculating how much everyone's gifts cost compared to his. And his wife stood near the reception desk with her head tilted, studying the framed project renderings on the wall with the deliberate disinterest of someone who wants you to know they are unimpressed. 8 years. Not a single phone call on my birthday. Not a text when I survived a car accident that left me with a fractured wrist and no health insurance. Not one word when I opened this firm. 8 years of total, deliberate silence. And here they were, standing in the middle of the life I built without them. I smoothed my blazer, walked down the interior stairs, and crossed the lobby floor toward them. My father turned around when he heard my heels on the concrete. There was no greeting. There was no hug. My father looked me up and down the way a man looks at a used car he is thinking about lowballing, and then he said, "We need to use a conference room." I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at my mother, who gave me a thin, hopeful smile that did not reach her eyes. I looked at my brother, who had finally stopped pacing and was now watching me with the particular expression of a person who has already decided how a conversation is going to end. I told Dani to hold my calls. Then I led them to the second-floor conference room. The room had floor-to-ceiling glass on one side, looking out over the street below. A long white oak table ran through the center. I had renovated this building myself. I had chosen every material in it. The concrete, the oak, the steel-framed glass, all of it. I knew every inch of this space the way you know the inside of your own chest. I sat at the head of the table. I did not offer them coffee. My father did not sit. He remained standing at the far end of the table with his hands flat on the surface, which was a power posture he had been using since I was 12 years old. My brother took the chair closest to him. My mother sat 2 seats down and began quietly straightening the edge of a coaster. My sister-in-law stood near the window and continued not being impressed by things. My father said, "We are going to keep this simple. Your brother's firm is going through a restructuring period. He needs a creative partner with an established client base. We have discussed it as a family, and we have decided that the right thing for you to do is to bring him on as a co-director of this company. He gets 40% equity and a salary draw starting immediately. I waited to see if there was more. My father added, "You owe this family. Everything you learned about design, you learned because we put a roof over your head and food on your table for 22 years. This company exists because of the foundation we gave you. It is only fair that your brother benefits from it now." I looked at my brother. He looked back at me with the careful expression of a man who has rehearsed this and is waiting for his cue. I said, "Tell me about the restructuring." My father started to answer, but my brother held up one hand. "I have got it," he said. He sat forward in his chair and began what I could immediately recognize was a pitch. He told me his general contracting business had hit a temporary setback. A large residential development deal had fallen through. Some of his subcontractors had walked. There was a cash flow disruption. Nothing that could not be fixed with the right strategic realignment. He used the phrase, strategic realignment, 4 times in 2 minutes. I listened. I did not interrupt. I let him finish. Then I said, "How long have you been behind on payroll?" The question landed like a dropped tool on a concrete floor. My brother's rehearsed expression cracked just slightly at the edges. He shifted in his chair and said, "That is a temporary situation." I said, "I know about the lien on your equipment. I know about the 2 subcontractors who filed complaints with the State Contractor Licensing Board. I know that your largest residential client terminated your contract 6 weeks ago for failure to meet milestones and is currently pursuing a claim against your bonding company." My sister-in-law turned away from the window for the first time. My brother stared at me. "How do you know any of that?" he said. I said, "Because when someone walks into my firm asking for 40% of it, I do my research." My father slapped his hand flat on the table. He did not like losing control of the room. He pointed at me and said, "None of that matters. What matters is family. Your brother needs help and you are in a position to provide it. This is not a negotiation. This is what decent people do." My mother made a small, sad sound. She said, "Sweetheart, we have missed you so much. We just want to bring the family back together. Helping your brother is the first step." I looked at my mother for a moment. I thought about the night my father told me to get out. I was 23 years old. I had spent 2 years working part-time as a drafting assistant and saving every paycheck while I finished my degree. I had $11,000 in a savings account that I was protecting like it was oxygen, because it was going to be the deposit on a tiny studio apartment and the capital for my first professional portfolio. My father wanted me to hand it to my brother, who had just launched a contracting business without a business plan or a license. When I said no, my father told me I was a selfish, ungrateful parasite who had never contributed a single thing to the family. He told me I was no longer welcome in his home. My mother stood in the hallway and watched him change the locks. I thought about all of that while she sat at my conference table talking about missing me and bringing the family together. Then I said, "I want to ask you something, all of you." I looked at each of them in turn. I said, "Where were you when I was sleeping on a friend's couch for 4 months because I could not afford a lease deposit? Where were you when I was working 60-hour weeks drafting plans for a firm that paid me barely above minimum wage while I built my portfolio at night? Where were you when I opened this studio with $1,200 left in my account and no clients and no guarantee of anything?" The room was quiet. My sister-in-law said, "You always were so independent." She said it like it was an accusation. I said, "I was independent because I had no other choice." My father picked up where he had left off, as if I had not said anything at all. He told me I was being emotional. He told me I was letting old grievances cloud my business judgment. He told me that my brother had skills and industry connections that could genuinely add value to my operation, and that 40% was a fair exchange for what he would bring to the table. I asked what specific value my brother would bring. My father listed 3 things. None of them were things my firm needed. My firm has a full estimating team. My firm has established vendor relationships. My firm does not do residential contracting. I said, "What you are describing is not a strategic partnership. What you are describing is a cash infusion disguised as an equity agreement. You want me to absorb my brother's failing business, carry his salary, and hand over nearly half of what I built in exchange for nothing that serves my clients. My father's jaw tightened. My brother leaned forward and said, "You would not even have clients if Dad had not introduced you to the Harrington Group when you first started out." I said, "My father introduced me to David Harrington at a dinner party 8 months after I opened this firm. David Harrington did not hire me. I sent David Harrington 17 follow-up emails over 4 months, completed 2 unpaid consultation sessions, and eventually won his account by delivering a renovation concept that saved his firm $200,000 in projected construction costs. I built that relationship. I kept that relationship. My father made an introduction at a dinner party. Those are not the same thing." My brother sat back. My father straightened his jacket and shifted his approach. His voice dropped into the lower, slower register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while he was being unreasonable. He said, "Let me explain something to you about how this building works. I am a member of the Piedmont Business Coalition. I have been a member for 11 years. The chairman of the coalition is a man named Walter Greer. Walter Greer happens to be the managing partner of the real estate group that owns this building you are sitting in right now." He picked up his phone from the table and held it loosely. He said, "I play golf with Walter. I have dinner with Walter. One phone call from me, and he can make your lease situation very complicated for you. That is not a threat. That is information." My mother looked down at the table. My sister-in-law glanced at my brother. I looked at my father. I let a few seconds pass. Then I said, "Go ahead." He frowned. He said, "Excuse me." I said, "Call Walter. Please. Put him on speaker." My father looked at me the way he used to look at me when I was a child and I had done something he did not expect, like he was recalibrating. He said, "Do not test me." I said, "I am not testing you. I am genuinely inviting you to make the call. If Walter Greer has the ability to affect my business, I would like to hear that conversation directly. Please, put the phone on the table and call him." Something shifted behind my father's eyes. It was barely visible, a flicker of uncertainty that he suppressed almost immediately under a fresh layer of confidence. He was the kind of man who had spent decades using implied power as currency, and he was not accustomed to someone calling the bluff. He believed, I think, that I would back down, that the mention of a powerful name and an implied threat would produce the same effect it had always produced, which was silence and compliance. He set his phone flat on the white oak table and dialed. The ring-tone filled the room. My mother adjusted the coaster again. My sister-in-law was very still near the window. A man answered on the third ring. He sounded like he was in the middle of something. His voice was relaxed and distracted. My father put on the voice he used at charity dinners. He said, "Walter, it is Frank. How are you? I know it is the middle of the week. I will keep this brief." He laughed the way men laugh when they are performing comfort they do not feel. He said, "I am actually sitting right now in one of your properties downtown, that design firm on South Tryon. I have a small situation involving a tenant, and I am hoping you can help me sort it out quickly. The owner is my daughter, and she and I are having a bit of a disagreement about some business matters. I was hoping you could give me the name of whoever handles the lease renewals over there, or possibly reach out to them directly and let them know that she and I need some flexibility in how we resolve this." There was a pause on the other end. Then the man said, "Frank, which property are you in?" My father gave the street address. Another pause. Longer this time. My brother shifted in his chair. The man said, "Frank, I have to stop you. I think there has been some confusion. I do not own that property anymore. I sold it. The sale closed about 5 months ago. I liquidated most of my commercial holdings on that corridor when the portfolio rebalancing came through. I have no relationship with that address whatsoever. I cannot help you with anything there. I am sorry." My father's face went very still. He said, "Who did you sell it to?" The man said, "A private buyer. It was a cash transaction. I do not have any further information I can share about that, Frank. You would need to contact the new ownership directly. Listen, I have got a call coming in. Can we catch up later this week?" My father said yes. He said, "Of course." He said, "Talk soon." His voice had changed. The dinner party warmth was still there, but it was operating over something hollow underneath, like a floor that has started to give. The call ended. My brother said, "Who bought it?" My father did not answer. He was looking at me. He had been looking at me since the moment Walter said, "Private buyer." His eyes had the careful, recalculating quality of a man who has just realized he may have walked into a room without knowing what is in it. I reached into the leather portfolio that I had brought to the table at the start of this meeting. I withdrew a single document and placed it in the center of the table. It was the recorded deed of ownership for the building we were sitting in, filed with Mecklenburg County 5 months ago. The entity listed as the purchasing party was a limited liability company called Stonebridge Properties. The registered agent and sole managing member of Stonebridge Properties was me. I said, "I bought this building in May. Cash offer. The previous ownership wanted a fast close and I had been watching this property for 2 years. I own the floor we are on. I own the floor below it. I own the parking structure on the west side of the lot. My firm leases studio space from my own holding company, which means I am, in effect, my own landlord." My father stared at the deed. His mouth opened slightly. He closed it. I said, "There is no lease to threaten, because there is no landlord to call. You were going to ask your golf partner to evict me from my own property." My brother picked up the document and read the first paragraph. He set it back down. He looked at his wife. She looked at the window. My mother said quietly, "I had no idea." I said, "I know you did not. Because nobody in this family ever asked. Nobody ever called to ask how I was doing, or what I was working on, or whether I had managed to survive. You called today because my brother needs money, and you decided I was the logical source." My father was a man who built his entire identity around never being outmaneuvered. He had been a regional sales director for a distribution company for 20 years. He coached Little League. He was treasurer of the business coalition. He was the man who knew people, who could call in favors, who operated through a network of reciprocal obligations that he had spent decades carefully maintaining. The idea that his 23-year-old daughter, the one he had put out on the street with 2 garbage bags and a fractured future, had spent the subsequent 8 years not just surviving but quietly assembling the kind of asset base that made his network irrelevant, was not something his mind was able to absorb quickly. He pulled himself together. He stood up straighter. He picked his phone back up off the table and held it in a way that was meant to signal he still had options. He said, "Owning a building does not change the core issue here. Your brother is family. Family takes care of each other. I do not care what entity you set up or what property you purchased. The right thing is still the right thing." My brother saw his opening and leaned forward again. He said, "Look, let us reset. Forget the 40%. Let us talk about a consulting arrangement. I come on in an advisory capacity, no equity, just a monthly retainer while my business stabilizes. 6 months. I help you with client outreach and you help me get back on my feet. That is reasonable. That is what family does." My sister-in-law nodded beside him. I looked at my brother for a moment. I thought about what it would have taken him to walk in here today. The pride he had swallowed to come to his younger sister's office building with a proposal in his hand. I felt something close to sympathy for exactly 2 seconds, and then I remembered the last conversation we had 8 years ago, which was the night my father changed the locks. I had called my brother from a gas station parking lot. I had asked him if I could sleep on his couch for a few days while I figured out my next move. He told me he and his girlfriend did not have room. He told me I should have just signed the money over like Dad asked. Then he hung up. I said, "A 6-month retainer. Let me ask you something first. Walk me through one actual project you have completed in the last 3 years that is relevant to what my firm does. A commercial interior or architectural renovation. Scope, budget, outcome." My brother looked at me. I waited. He said, "My work is mostly residential." I said, "I know. My firm does not do residential." He said, "I could learn the commercial side." I said, "You are asking me to pay you a monthly retainer for 6 months while you learn a sector you have no experience in, using a client base I spent 8 years building, at a time when your own business is facing contractor complaints and bonding claims? And you want me to do this because we share a last name?" My sister-in-law said, "You are being cruel." I said, "I am being accurate. There is a difference." My father's voice came back sharp and hard. He said, "Enough. I am done with this conversation. You think you are so much better than us because you bought a building. You think your fancy firm makes you better than your own blood. Let me tell you something. I know the director of the Charlotte Business Chamber. I know the licensing board coordinator for commercial contractors. I know people at 3 of the largest architecture firms in this city. One email from me and I will make sure every door that has been opening for you in this market starts closing. I will make sure people know exactly what kind of person you are. That you turn your back on your family when they need you. That you are the kind of woman who would rather let her brother lose everything than lift one finger to help. The room was very quiet. I said, "Are you finished?" He said, "Sign the consulting agreement, and this all goes away." I said, "I am not going to do that. And I want to address the part about your connections, because I think you deserve to understand something clearly before you start making phone calls." I opened my portfolio again and removed a second document. It was a project contract. I placed it on the table face up. The header read Meridian Design Group in partnership with Carolina's Regional Medical Alliance. Below that was a project value in 7 figures. I said, "The Carolinas Regional Medical Alliance is currently my largest active client. They represent a long-term renovation program across 11 facilities. The executive who oversees their capital projects division is a woman named Sandra Cho. Sandra Cho is also, as of last spring, the incoming chair of the Charlotte Business Chamber." My brother looked at the document. I said, "Sandra has been my client for 4 years. She refers other clients to me. She has written recommendations for my firm on 2 grant applications. So, when you tell me you are going to call someone at the business chamber and damage my reputation, I want you to think about that carefully. Because the most senior person in that organization right now has hired me, trusts me, and knows my work firsthand." My father's confidence had been draining steadily for the past 15 minutes. The document in front of him was removing the last of it. My mother said, "Frank, maybe we should just go." My father said, "No." He pushed the Medical Alliance contract aside. He said, "None of this changes what you owe this family. You sat at our table for 22 years. You owe us." I said, "I want to talk about what I owe this family. I want to talk about the $8,000 I had saved in a joint account that my father transferred out of on the day he changed the locks." I pulled out a third document. It was a bank statement with a highlighted line showing a withdrawal made the same week I was put out of the house. I said, "I discovered this 3 years ago when I was going through old financial records. I had forgotten the account existed. I was 23. I did not fully understand what a joint account meant until a financial advisor explained it to me. You had access, and you used it." My mother went pale. My brother said nothing. I said, "I am not going to pursue that legally. I made that decision a long time ago. But I want it acknowledged in this room that when you talk about what I owe this family, we should be honest about what this family took from me. $8,000, when I had nowhere to live, and no income was not a small amount. It was the difference between getting back on my feet in 2 months or 8. It set me back almost a year." My father said, "That money was owed to me for everything I spent raising you." I said, "You do not get reimbursed for raising your child. That is not how parenthood works." My sister-in-law began to move away from the window. She walked to the chair beside my brother and sat down. She touched his arm. She said, quietly, "Maybe this was a mistake." My brother looked at her. Something passed between them that I could not fully read. Then he looked at me. He said, "I am losing everything. I have 40 employees and I cannot make next month's payroll. I have 2 kids. I am not trying to steal from you. I am desperate." It was the first honest thing anyone had said in 45 minutes. I said, "I know." I looked at him directly. "I know you are, and I am sorry that you are in that position. I mean that. But desperation does not give you a right to my equity. It does not give our father the right to threaten me with industry connections he cannot actually leverage. And it does not give our mother the right to sit across from me and pretend she has been grieving my absence for 8 years when she had my phone number the entire time." My mother said, "I did not know how to reach out." I said, "You knew exactly how to reach out. You chose not to. And that is a choice I have made my peace with. But do not sit in my conference room and ask me to believe it was grief. What walked through my door today was not grief. It was a financial emergency with my family's name on it. My father's face had collapsed through several stages of emotion and had landed somewhere past anger into something that looked almost like bewilderment. He had built a life on the premise that authority traveled through hierarchy, that he sat at the top of this family's structure, and that the structure meant something. What he was confronting now was a version of his daughter that existed entirely outside that structure. She had built her own hierarchy. She owned the building. She controlled the relationships. She held the documents. He picked up his briefcase from the floor. He straightened his jacket one more time. He said, "You are going to regret this." I said, "I regret a lot of things. Mostly the years I spent wondering what I did wrong, but this conversation is not going to be one of them." He walked to the door. My mother stood and followed him. At the threshold, my mother paused and looked back at me. Her eyes were wet. I do not know if the tears were real. I had lost the ability to tell. She said, "I hope someday you can forgive us." I said, "Forgiveness is something I am working on for my own sake, but it does not mean what you want it to mean. It does not mean I owe you anything. It does not mean this conversation ends differently. It means I am choosing not to carry the weight of what you did. That is all." She nodded slowly and walked out. My brother stood last. He pushed the chair back and picked up his jacket from the back of it. He looked around the conference room. He looked at the white oak table, the glass wall, the project renderings pinned to the far panel. He looked at it the way you look at something you almost had. He said, "You really built all this?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought you would fail." I said, "I know you did." He walked out. I sat alone at the head of the conference table for a while. I listened to the ambient sounds of the studio below me, keyboards, a printer, Priya asking someone about a tile specification, the ordinary sounds of a business that existed because I had refused to stop building it. I called Danny on the intercom and asked her to send up 2 things. The first was a coffee. The second was a letter that my attorney had drafted 2 weeks ago and that I had been holding in my files for a month, waiting to decide if I would ever use it. The letter was addressed to my brother's contracting business. It was a formal notice from Stonebridge Properties informing all tenants and commercial operators in the South Tryon corridor that a property assessment was being conducted on 2 adjacent lots currently under month-to-month occupancy agreements. My brother's business had relocated its operational office into a small commercial unit in one of those lots 8 months ago. I had discovered it during routine review of my tenancy roll after the building purchase closed. He was paying a below-market rate on a verbal arrangement with the previous owner that had no formal lease documentation. The letter gave 60 days' notice of a lease formalization requirement. Any operator who could not produce a signed commercial lease with verified deposit would need to vacate by the compliance deadline. It was not a revenge document. It was a property management document. My attorney had confirmed it was entirely standard and legally appropriate given the gap in paperwork. But holding it, I thought about what it meant. My brother had walked into my building today to demand equity in my firm. He had done it without knowing that his own office address was on a property I controlled. He had let our father threaten me with a landlord who no longer existed without knowing that the actual landlord had been sitting across the table from him the entire time. I sent the letter. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment. It was not satisfaction in the way people imagine revenge to feel satisfying. It was quieter than that. It was the particular feeling of a system finally reaching equilibrium. For 8 years, my family had moved through the world under the assumption that I was the variable, the one who could be pressured and redirected and eventually collapsed into whatever shape they needed. What they encountered today was the discovery that the variable had become the constant. I was no longer the one adjusting. They were. 6 weeks later, my brother's contracting business formally dissolved. The bonding company paid out the residential client claim. The subcontractor complaints were settled. He laid off his remaining employees in stages over 3 weeks, which by all accounts he handled with a great deal more grace than I would have expected. I heard this not from my family but from a mutual acquaintance who knew someone on his crew. My father lost 2 of his business coalition roles when an industry colleague he had approached about leveraging contacts against me found the request inappropriate and declined to participate. The colleague mentioned it to someone else. Word traveled the way word travels in mid-sized professional communities. My father's network did not disappear, but it became more complicated. the way a room becomes more complicated when people in it start reconsidering their positions. My mother sent me an email in November. It was 4 sentences. It said she had been in therapy for 6 months. It said she was beginning to understand some things she had not understood before. It said she was not asking for anything. It said she hoped I was well. I read it twice, and then I saved it without responding. Maybe someday I will write back. That door is not locked from my side, but I am also not standing at it waiting for someone to knock. I took on the Atlanta hotel project. I hired a senior associate to manage overflow. I began the process of renovating the second lot adjacent to my building, which I am converting into expanded studio space. The construction team I hired is made up largely of workers who had been laid off from my brother's operation and needed placement. I did not do this as a statement. I did it because they were skilled, available, and came with documented references. In this business, you hire good people when you find them. My firm completed its 48th project in December. I stood in the finished lobby of a medical center in Asheville and watched the client's face when she walked through for the first time. That moment, the moment when someone sees the space you imagined for them become real, is the reason I do this work. No amount of equity threat or family pressure or implied leverage has ever given me that. Only the work gives me that. I have been asked since then, by friends and by my therapist and by one journalist who interviewed me for a small business publication, whether I feel guilty about the way things ended, whether there is something unresolved. What I tell them is this: I am not the one who created the rupture. I was the one asked to fund my brother's failures with my survival money. I was the one put into a November night with 2 bags and a bank account that was emptied while I was gone. I did not start the estrangement. I simply refused to end it on terms that required me to pretend it had not happened. That is not bitterness. Bitterness is wanting them to fail because you failed. What I have is something different. It is the clear-eyed recognition that some people will only value you once they cannot use you, and that the moment they discover they cannot, they reveal exactly what the relationship was built on. My family came to me because they needed capital. They will rebuild around a new source of capital when they find one. That is how they operate. Understanding that is not cruelty. It is just honesty. I built my firm on honesty, on accurate assessments, on not telling a client a space can be something it cannot be. You do the same work on your own history eventually, if you stay with it long enough. You stop renovating the version of events that protects everyone, and you look at the structure underneath. When you do that, sometimes you find that the foundation was never sound, and sometimes the most honest thing you can build is something entirely new. If you have ever been told by the people who were supposed to love you that you were the problem, that your ambition was selfishness, that your self-preservation was betrayal, I want you to hear this directly. The story they told about you was the story they needed to tell to justify what they were doing. It was never the truth about you. The truth about you is still being written, and you are the only one holding the pen. If this reached you today, leave a comment and let me know where you are watching from. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, hit subscribe. I will be here.